my gosh, oh baby, we have some drama. Or as my Canadian friends might say, we got some drama. We got a ton of drama for you today. Oh, it's just going to be so good. It's going to be juicy. We have some Twitter drama going on between Phil Vischer and William Wolfe. You might not know who William Wolfe is. I'll tell you about it. This is for one thing, this is just going to be fun. It's going to be fun. We're going to have to get into it. I'm going to explain what's happening in this Twitter battle because we need to think about what we think about.
Think about what you think about.
Think about it. I'll tell you what, we got to think about what we think about on this one. It's going to explain a lot of what's happening. We're going to get so much into it, and you're going to be like, oh my gosh, John, that was so very helpful. And I'm going to be like, I'm so glad. And you'll be like, I think this might be the best show ever. And I'm going to be like, it probably is. We're going to jump into this stuff right here on Cooper Stuff. What is up, all my friends? Cooper Stuff. It's kind of a bonus episode almost, because you want more, don't you? You need more. You guys, there is a Twitter battle that happened, and I was like, I got to jump on this because this explains so much. Here's the thing. Do you ever feel like, and I know the answer is yes, do you ever feel like you hear these people arguing, and you're like, I don't even understand we can't even argue because we're not talking about the same categories. There's a reason for that. I'm going to explain that. There's a reason for it. We used to be able to argue about stuff, but we agreed enough on the categories that you and I would know, all right, we're both talking about the same thing, but I have a different view of this than you do. Now, you sometimes talk and you go, we're not even talking about the same categories. You're not, because it is a view of reality that is different, even within Christianity. So let's start with this. Let me tell you what happened on the Twitter beef. All right, this is between a guy called William Wolfe. I'm going to be honest with you. I did not know who William Wolfe was before this. And I'm just reading this online on standingforfreedom.com. I'm not even familiar. Somebody sent this to me. So let's just read this. It says William Wolfe is a 10-year veteran of the conservative political movement, I think called Standing for Freedom, I guess. William Wolfe served as a senior official in the Trump administration, both as a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense at the Pentagon and a Director of Legislative Affairs at the Department of State. All right, so I don't know who that is. He says before that, he worked for the Heritage Action for America, all right, blah, blah, blah. All right, that's that. All right, you guys already know who Phil Vischer is. Phil Vischer is he was one of the creators of VeggieTales. He is one of the podcast hosts of the Holy Post podcast. It might be called the Unholy Post podcast. I can't remember. You have to check it out yourself. Okay. So I've had some beefs with Phil Vischer. Me and Phil Vischer do not agree. All right. We do not agree. But here's the thing. It's not just that we don't agree. I believe, and I'm not even trying to be rude to Phil Vischer. I'm just telling you what I actually think. I don't think I'm putting words in his mouth. I don't even agree with Phil Vischer on like his view of reality. And I'm going to explain what that means in a second, because I know that might sound kind of crazy. I'm not saying that I disagree with him sort of like, you might disagree with somebody about their eschatology, right? How somebody's like, yeah, I know that you think that scripture when it says that, 2 men will be in a field and then one of them will be gone. I know you might think that means, that the saved people are all raptured from the earth. I don't take that verse to be that way. I take it to be that. I'm not talking about that kind of disagree. I'm talking about disagreeing about fundamental categories. I think the best way to do this would be for me to read some of the Twitter drama and then explain to you a little bit about some things. Then we'll go back and we read it again. And I think that some people are going to be like, oh my gosh, this is why I can't agree with anybody. So why don't we start it here? Here's the thread that I saw. This is from @WilliamE.Wolfe, if you want to look that up. Actually, if you want to look up his thing, is William _ and then _Wolfe. And Wolfe is spelled with an E at the end, okay? Here's what he says. Here's a periodic reminder that, quote, white Christian nationalism isn't a real thing, doesn't exist in America, and poses no threat to democracy. And the fearmongers who have built a cottage industry by peddling fake studies, social science, and history on this are mostly liars. Now understand, I'm just reading this tweet, all right? I don't know William Wolfe. I'm not here to defend William Wolfe in general. I'm reading the tweet. All right, let's keep going. he says, then he keeps going with this thread. Christian nationalism is a real thing worth having a serious conversation about. Okay, so notice he's nuancing between Christian nationalism and white Christian nationalism, which we've talked about here on the show only a little bit. All right, so he says Christian nationalism is a real thing worth having a serious conversation about, defining rightly and embracing in appropriate and biblical ways. White Christian nationalism is a figment of their race-baiting imaginations invented to sell books to liberals and CNN to do CNN bets. I can't read the bottom of that, but that's basically what it says. All right. I think he has one more. In other words, here is a discourse hack to know who to take seriously on here and who is pushing propaganda. Do they use the phrase white Christian nationalism in a serious way? If so, they are not serious or trustworthy. They are charlatans and partisans posing as academics. All right, that's what he says. Phil Vischer then replies to him, and Phil Vischer says, serious question. When Lauren Boebert says the, quote, church should be directing the government, how do you think she would feel if the black church or the Latino church was directing the U.S. government towards the priorities of the black or Latino communities? William Wolfe responds to Phil Vischer. He says, I don't think any, quote, church should be directing the government. Phil Vischer replies to that and says, I agree, but that wasn't the question. If Boebert believes, quote, the church should direct the government, and we can assume she doesn't mean the historically black denominations that support Democrat candidates 90% of the time, does that qualify as white Christian nationalism? Now a third party comes into the drama, a guy called Joel Berry, at Joel W. Berry. I don't know who this person is either. Maybe I should. I just don't. Okay. Well, he comes in and he responds and he says, maybe we should stop thinking in terms of race when it comes to churches and instead divide them into biblical churches, and he puts parentheses, black and white, and churches corrupted by hustlers, con men, and pro-choice politics, black and white. There are plenty of black churches on Boebert's side. They just aren't the stereotypical black churches endorsed by black politicians and paternalistic white liberals. Phil Vischer responds and says, what percentage of black Protestants voted for Trump? Let me put it another way. Is Boebert pro-Trump or pro-Biden? Do black Protestants overwhelmingly support Trump or Biden? Therefore, would Boebert be in favor of the black Protestant church directing the government? Okay, so then Joel Berry responds to that and says, here's the thing. An idea or philosophy or theology isn't, quote, white just because it's supported by a majority of white people. And it's not, quote, black just because it's supported by a majority of white people. The church is the church. And you really poison the discourse by racially labeling something based on the skin color of the majority of the adherents. It's insulting to black people to call good theology white. And I sincerely hope the majority of black churches that have been corrupted by bad theology and politics will see the light. And I would hope the same for any white church facing that kind of corruption. I think black Christians should be insulted by your insinuation that Democrat pro-choice politics is an integral part of their skin color. This just keeps on going. Phil Vischer then replies and says, I'm hoping you didn't mean to say the majority of black churches have been, quote, corrupted by bad theology. I'm hoping. Joel Berry responds to that and says, statistically, the majority of black evangelicals are pro-choice. In my opinion, if you're pro-choice, your entire theology and worldview is corrupt to the core. But besides that, why is it so egregious to think it's possible that the black church, after decades of segregation, redlining, and corruption by cynical inner-city political machines, would find themselves cut off from a theologically and intellectually sound theology? I'm not saying it's their fault, but you have to get past this bias you have that someone being oppressed or marginalized automatically makes them more noble, godly, correct, etc. Why is it so far-fetched to think maybe the majority black church is theologically bankrupt just as black communities are financially bankrupt after years of being cut off from theological and financial resources? All right, this keeps going. This keeps going. And I got to stop because I got to explain some things because I think people are like, what in the world is happening? My guess is you're probably asking yourselves a little bit of that question right now. I think if we are going to really talk about this, I got to take a quick break to explain something. Okay, we have to talk about postmodernism. And I know that might sound strange, but believe me, this is going to help you because You can't assume that when we're talking about categories, that they're all the same categories we used to talk about. Why are we talking about white church and black church? All right. So for me and for a lot of people listening, Skillet, I don't like the category. I actually reject the category of white church and black church. I don't like it. There's only one true church. And the church is made up, thank God, of people who are from all different ethnic backgrounds. We all different skin colors, all different tongues, every tribe and every tongue. That is wonderful. And we have been made one in Christ Jesus through the cross. Supernatural covenant. Okay? So that's it. That's the thing. We have one church. But we have all these particular categories now. We talk about the white church, the black church, evangelicals versus ex-evangelicals, white evangelicals versus black evangelicals. It's like the whole thing is just getting absolutely crazy. You have to understand something about postmodernism. So let's start with this one thing about postmodernism. Postmodernism says this: there is no such thing as truth. There's no such thing as absolute truth, is the better way to say it. There's no universal true thing that is true everywhere for all time. That does not exist in postmodernism. Some of the postmodern philosophers would say, well, there may be something absolute true. We have no idea what that could be, and we could never know it even if it was. The idea of wondering if the universal absolute truth is even real is just, it could never happen. So you may as well not try. What they believe is this. Number one, you have to understand that postmodernists do not believe that there is such thing as physical reality. Okay, so if I look at you and I say, I'm holding up this can of soda and it's real, they challenge that it's real. You don't know that it's actually real. It's the way you perceive something, right? The way that you perceive it may be different than the way that someone else may perceive that thing. And they have a whole bunch of gobbledygook about why they think that that's a thing. They do not believe in the idea of the individual. They hate individualism. They can't stand it. It's why right now people hate the idea in our society. They hate the idea of like individual rights, individual liberties. They do not like that because they do not believe that we live in quote our reality. Okay, and when we say our reality, I do not mean a shared reality. We don't all share the same reality in postmodernism. We have realities. It's my reality, it's your reality, so on and so forth. But they do not believe that we come to that conclusion about what my reality is based on my own individual thoughts. I am not a brand new, unique individual, a brand new, unique John Cooper. That's not what it is. I come to my conclusions about, quote, my truth and my reality, not as an individual, but as a product of the group or groups that I belong to. Because there's no such thing as truth. Everything is a construct in their world. Every single thing literally is a construct. So you are not discovering truth about the world. So you're not opening your eyes, looking at the world and say, oh, I'm discovering something true that the sun rises every single day. It's perceived through a construct, not through as an individual, but through a social group. So I come to knowledge, not based on any individual thoughts. I come to knowledge based on what my social groups have believed, and my social groups created language, all right? They created a language to express how they experience reality, okay? So they experience reality, then they create words and language to try to explain that thing. But listen, every single language, every single construct, everything is all about power in postmodernism. So they are creating language to explain their version of reality so that they may have power over other people's realities. So you come to your idea of reality, not based on individualism, not based on your own thoughts even. You might think you have your own thoughts, but it's only given to you, that knowledge is given to you through language, through your social groups, okay? So my social group is, so in other words, I might think that I know what it's like to be a man, but really, that's just an experience that I have had that has not only been shaped by my social community, meaning that I am a man. It's not just shaped, it was given to me through language. So in other words, through power, it was given to me. So I have experienced what it's like to be a man through a power structure of what men have decided in my culture that men should act like. You see what I'm saying? That could be true for me being white. That could be true for me being heterosexual, for me being Christian, for me being born in America. That's the way that they see truth. You also have to understand that because it's all power, postmodernists believe everything is about power. There is no absolute truth. There is no absolute reality. All it is people vying for power. And that's not good. That's evil. It's bad. Okay? Now, it's not bad in the same way that Marxists view power as being bad. You have to understand this because postmodernism is being infected through a bit of Marxism. But listen, OG Marx, I'm talking about the OG. The OG is saying, no. The bourgeoisie, which is the business owners, all right, they are actually evil. They are wicked because what they believe is wicked. What they are doing is wicked. And we need a revolution against those wicked people for an outcome of, an egalitarian, utopian communist society type thing, right? That is going to be the outcome because what they believe is evil. Well, postmodernism says there is no such thing as absolute truth. And if there's no such thing as absolute truth, there's no such thing as absolute morality, meaning there's not something that is just inherently good and inherently bad. So everything is about vying for power. But it's not necessarily that I want to overthrow your power because what you believe is evil. It inherently needs to be overthrown because it is oppressive. Why? Because it's majority culture. Does that make sense? It's not evil because of what you actually stand for. It's evil by the principle that you are the majority culture telling me the way that reality has to be, when in fact, there's no such thing as reality. That's your reality. Does that make sense? It's your reality, and then you decided, well, I'm going to dominate everyone else. Because I like the way that I experience reality, and men have experienced reality, and white people have experienced reality, and Christians have experienced reality, and yada, yada, yada. And because that, all that stuff, none of it's real. It's all just structures. Just like they say gender is a social construct. Race is a social construct. Language is a social construct. It's not actually real. So in that, they've created language, and a word like absolute truth is nothing more than a tool of oppression. To say that what I tell you, which is my version of reality, which isn't absolute, it's just my opinion, basically. The world, the way that I see it and the way I dig it, I kind of like it. So because I like it, I'm going to tell you that it's absolute truth that reality is this way. For instance, if I like Dr. Pepper, which I do, and I say, you know what, Dr. Pepper is actually the best one because it's actually not too sweet, but it's also not boring. Coke is a little bit more boring. Dr. Pepper is the best, and it is absolutely true for all time, for all cultures. Dr. Pepper is the best drink, and if you don't like Dr. Pepper, then there's something immoral about you. That's what they believe that we are doing about everything. That's what postmodernism teaches. Now, you have to understand that for them, it will be it will be perpetual activism. This is when the Marxism comes in. It is perpetual activism. Who's it against? All those people doing bad stuff? Well, the people doing bad stuff is nothing more than whoever is in majority culture. That's it. That's all it is. And this is the reason that we have all these things like standpoint theory. This is the reason that people say, no, we need to know what someone else thinks because they have had a true, authentic experience as a person of color. A true, authentic experience as a woman. So when you see people, and it's usually going to be on the left, and it's usually going to be people of color. So let's say you have a black person who is saying something negative about a black person who is conservative. Somebody like Voddie Baucham, for instance, who is a Christian theologian and author. Voddie Baucham wrote a book called Fault Lines that I thought was fantastic, but a lot of black Christians can't stand Voddie Baucham. They have even said things like this. He is a black face, but he's not a black voice. What they mean is that he is not authentically black. He has not had the lived experience of a black person. Why? Well, in crude terms, because he thinks white. Do you see what I'm saying? This is their category. Now, a lot of us go, wow, that sounds kind of racist to me. I think it's kind of racist to say, well, that black person kind of thinks white. We think that it's racist because we have a different view of reality. Do you see what I'm saying? I think, well, Voddie Baucham is an individual. And when he thinks this and this, I don't think of him as thinking like a white person. I just think Yeah, I mean, that's what he believes. He's allowed to have an expression different than what somebody else might think, even if the majority of people who look like him believe a thing. Do you understand what I mean? People come to me all the time because of the way I look with my beard and stuff like that, and they go, "Oh yeah, do you love country music?" Well, not really. I mean, I don't hate it, but I don't listen to country music. They assume I drive a truck because of the way I look. I do drive a truck. Hello. Anyway, but the point is why do they assume that? Because a lot of people do. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean that I hate trucks because I don't drive one? Because I think that a car is better? Or that I think rock music is better than country music? So now I'm not fitting in with what I'm supposed to fit in with. So now I'm not authentically a Southern person. I'm raised in the South. I'm not authentic, maybe. Does that make sense? That might be a bad example. It just came to me, but I hope that that's making some sense to you. So this is where standpoint theory, all this stuff comes into the church, because what they're saying is this. The white church, which is a category I reject, but I have to use it because that's what all these people are talking about. What they're trying to say is this. The white church for centuries has come up with, quote, white theology. And all that white theology is your lived experience as a white person in Western culture. And because you've experienced a certain way, because now this is where postmodernism is coming into the church. You guys, this is what it's all about. I'm about to unlock it for you right here on Cooper, all up in here in this piece. About to unlock it. Postmodernism is coming into the church and infecting our theology. This is where it comes in. It says, white theology is nothing more than your perspective of being a white person. You might call it, quote, good theology, but good theology is the same thing as white theology. You just named it something else so that you could have power and oppression over other people, because that is the way you dominate. The truth, when we try to sway people with our domination of the reigning cultures and majority cultures, you do it through language. That's what they believe. You construct language in order to bring oppression to people. That's what postmodernists believe. So white people had their expression of what maybe the Bible is saying, and we call it good hermeneutics or good theology, being consistent with the language of the Bible, yada, yada. That is nothing more than your lived experience. And you cannot know the truth of the Bible until you get other, quote, perspectives. That's what they mean when they say perspectives. In everyday language, we say that. And this is why people are so confused. I would say that. I'd say, hey, Cor, as a woman, what's your perspective on the way that I spoke to my daughter? Well, that kind of makes sense, right? It's kind of interesting. My wife might say, John, my perspective of the way you should talk to your daughter is that you need to be a little bit more gentle, because you do sound kind of mean and you kind of maybe sound threatening. There might be a nicer way to say that. Now, of course, she would say it about my son as well, but you get it, right? I need to be nicer all the time because I'm kind of, a poopy head. Anyway, so what's your perspective on that? What can I do better? Now, I don't think that she's actually bringing me a brand new truth, but I'm interested in knowing. For that matter, I'm interested in knowing what kind of other people who do like country music, or do have a different color skin than me, or grew up in a different part of town than me, and yada, yada, yada. I'm interested to know what they think. And so, but this is what it comes down to, is that you could have a white person and a black person growing up in the same area of town who end up agreeing on the same stuff. They could end up being conservative, or they could be hyper progressive. In other words, there's a lot of factors that go into this, rather than just this one aspect of the color of your skin that is now determinant of the things that you have to think because of an authentic lived experience as that individual. This is what's happening. This is the reason that we're having a fallout. So what you are seeing in Christianity, I'm going to go back and read this and then I'll explain it as we go so you understand. What we're having in Christianity is this new movement of what I would call the Christian left, who are pushing, saying, because they are postmodern in the way that they think we should view the world. And they're saying, guys, Cooper stuff, you need to stop being so mean. You need to stop being so dogmatic. This is what the Bible says. You don't know for sure what the Bible says. Why? We're not saying there's no such thing as absolute truth, but for you to claim that you know it is arrogant. You need more perspectives. And so you need to stop being so dogmatic. Do you see what I'm trying to say? Let me explain the difference. Let me explain the difference. Are there things that you and I can know for absolutely certain? I, by God, hope that there are. Or else our faith is built on nothing more than a hope. Do you see what I'm saying? But our faith isn't built on a hope. Our faith is built on actual faith of something that is real, that happened. Jesus Christ died. Jesus Christ rose from the dead. John, are you absolutely sure he rose from the dead? Of course I'm absolutely sure. Now listen, would I say that I understand how Jesus rose from the dead and all of its implications to the fullest? No. Because I'm finite. I cannot understand that to the fullest. Neither can you. No one can understand that to the fullest. So would you say I have a 100% comprehensive, perfect, truthful understanding of the absolute truth of Christ raising from the dead? No, I'm finite. I cannot understand the infinite things of God. It doesn't mean that it's not absolutely true that Jesus rose from the dead. Do you see what I'm saying? The postmodern version of that is this. Well, when you read that passage, you might think it's really clear that he literally rose up from the dead, but you can't know that. You might think you know that because that is from a social group, which is Western, white, Christianity, so on and so forth, and it was told to you. You came to knowledge through the language of the social group you belong to. So you think that it's literal, but that's not literal for all other cultures. And there's a lot that we can gain from other cultures. So how do we practically outwork this? What it means is this. All you conservative, white, evangelical, white theology, white people, whatever, white church, which I can't stand these categories, you need to stop pushing down your views. So if I can be fair to Phil Vischer, I don't know Phil Vischer. I don't think he's trying to say there's no such thing as absolute truth. I think what he's saying is, hey, we don't know what is absolutely true. We need to get all these other perspectives because why? Because we have to do activism. That is a demand. It doesn't matter if I agree with the quote, white perspective, which I hate using the term, but I'm using it because he uses it. I wonder if what Phil Vischer is saying is not so much that he's saying I don't agree. He might even be saying, I tend to agree with that white perspective, but of course I would because I'm white. And it's a social construct that I've been raised in. So I might tend to agree with it, but I do not need to say it. I need to stop talking and I need to listen to marginalized voices. This is why you hear this all the time. Listen to marginalized voices. This is what they mean. Why do I need to listen to marginalized voices? Because you are a part of majority culture and you are pushing your reality on everybody else. And there's no such thing as absolute reality. So how is this practically outworked in the church? What it means is this. No one can hold to any dogmatic position. And if you do, it is oppression. That is why they're always saying we need unity, but they're beating up on us day after day. You're a Christian nationalist. You're a white Christian nationalist. Of course you think Cooper stuff. You think this and this and this because of your privilege. They beat up on us every day while they talk about unity. What they mean is this. Cooper stuff, shut up. Stop talking with your privilege, your male privilege, your white privilege, your heteronormativity privilege, your Western privilege, your whatever privilege. Stop talking about that stuff and have unity. And unity means this. You can't be dogmatic about any of these things. I'm going to read you something from a book. Then I'm going to go back to this and you're going to be like, oh my gosh, you're going to understand it. And all of a sudden you're going to realize this is why you can't debate these things in a normal fashion with someone. That we don't agree on any of the same categories. I do not believe that everything is a social construct and that the only force in the universe is power. I don't believe that. I do believe there are things we can absolutely know for certain and that the church is held to for 2,000 years. But even that, they say, yeah, of course the church is held to it for 2,000 years because it came from power and privilege. Do you see how we're going? So therefore, the right thing to do is to overthrow that power and privilege and to embrace the new perspectives, because when we embrace the new perspectives, we have a bigger picture of the truth of God. That's what they believe. So they're saying in order to get a bigger picture of the truth of God, we have to embrace new perspectives, which means you stop being so dogmatic about these things like same-sex marriage. Stop being so dogmatic about these things like abortion. Oh, life starts in the womb. That's so insane. That's what they mean by this. I'm going to read you this. This is from someone called Anthea Butler, White Evangelical Racism. The Politics of Morality in America. Anthea, she is a professor of religion at UPenn, I think it's the University of Pennsylvania, if I remember correctly. She's absolutely progressive, and she is talking basically the white church is basically a church that is apostate in her mind. It is a church built on racism. It upholds racism. It has in her words, it has redefined what we think of being, quote, normative in Christianity. So we said, if somebody out there is going right now, John, I don't believe in white Christianity. I just believe in just Christianity. If that's you, and then you list out tenets of what you might think were historically held doctrines of the faith, what she is saying is actually, that is a bastardization of Christianity. In other words, that's a fake Christianity. That Christianity was made to uphold racism. You think it's normative because you've been told so, because that's what your social group wanted you to think. My answer is that evangelicalism is not a simply religious group after all. It's not even a religious group. Rather, it is a nationalistic political movement. You hear that? Evangelicalism it's not even religious. It's a nationalistic political movement whose purpose is to support the hegemony of white Christian men over and against the flourishing of others. Hegemony is basically its hegemony. This is like the idea of the ruling culture class. It's majority culture. We push our norms onto everybody else. What's the ruling hegemony in America? White men, heterosexual, cisgendered Christianity. That is the ruling hegemony. So what she's saying is, it's not even religious. It's nationalistic political movement, and their sole purpose is to support the hegemony of white Christian men over and against the flourishing of others. To put it more baldly, evangelicalism is an Americanized Christianity born in the context of white Christian slaveholders. See? So when you say, no, that's just good theology, all that means, good theology equals racist, slave-holding people who changed theology and then called it good theology. That's what she's saying. Let's keep going. It sanctified and justified segregation, violence, and racial prescription. Slavery and racism permeate evangelicalism, and as much as evangelicals like to protest that they are colorblind, their theologies, cultures, and beliefs are anything but. Evangelicals have burrowed their identities into the infrastructure of Republican politics since Billy Graham's relationship with Republican President Dwight D. Eisenhower. Evangelicalism is a religion that has benefited and continues to benefit from racism on both an individual level and a structural level, always under the guise of morality and patriotic nationalism. You hear that? So evangelicalism exists for the sole purpose of having a ruling class of white people over everybody else. And we did it in the name of religion. It wasn't real. Billy Graham started this with Dwight D. Eisenhower, and then we created this thing. Why? For a political movement. That's what white evangelical, that's what the white church is. That's what white theology is. It exists for the purpose of ruling politically over people of color and keeping some sort of segregationist type state, culturally speaking, into place, according to Anthea Butler. Racism in evangelicalism is not only about individual sin, it's about the corporate sins of a religious movement that continues to believe itself good, and that good is predicated on whiteness and the proximity to power. That is a remarkable statement. Let's say it again. It's about the corporate sins of a religious movement that continues to believe itself good. That's like me. That's like me. A lot of you. Well, I think we're good. No. And that the good that we believe in is predicated on what? Whiteness and the proximity to power. Well, you got to understand that this book is huge. This book is huge in Christian sales. Okay. This is not like, so, oh, John, you're cherry picking. No. This is what they believe. This is where it's coming from. Just so you know, this is not some random thing. Look it up on Amazon. This is a really popular, I would say, pop book happening in evangelicalism. This is the kind of stuff that Phil Vischer is into. I don't know Phil Vischer personally, but I listen to it. I get it. That's what they're saying. This is what David French is saying. All right, let's keep reading. As an African-American woman who once trained in evangelical seminary, I don't say these things lightly. Some of my most significant intellectual training took place during my time in evangelical circles. I'm grateful for it. I left evangelicalism in graduate school more than 20 years ago. I know both intellectually and emotionally how evangelicals think about the movement and how they protect it, which puts me at odds with the evangelical historians who claim that the 81% of evangelicals who voted for Donald Trump in 2016 aren't really evangelicals. I don't know what she's talking about. They are. I don't even know what that means. Let's move on. The historians just wish fervently that they weren't. Let's keep moving on. I'm going to skip one paragraph. Evangelicalism is at a precipice. It is no longer a movement to which American Christians look for a moral center. American evangelicalism lacks social, political, and spiritual effectiveness in the 21st century. It has become a religion lodged within a political party. It is a religion that promotes issues of importance almost exclusively to white conservatives. Evangelicalism embraces racists and says that evangelicals' interests, and only theirs, are the most important for all American citizens. This is a movement that could have and should have moved on from its roots in 19th century racism and slavery revealed in the book. Yet it has not. And that is due to the choices made by leaders and followers within the evangelical movement. Why have evangelicals and their leadership made choices over and over again to embrace racism? She answers, because it is what has allowed them to attain and hold political power. All of this is postmodernism 101. Why does somebody do a thing they do? Because they want power. That's it. Everything is about power. Remarkably, this book doesn't mention the fact that black Christians vote consistently Democrat in much greater numbers than white Christians vote Republican. So it's really remarkable. Why? So why is it that maybe black Christians are trying to get power? Maybe they're all about a political party. It's like 92% voted for Biden in 2020. After Biden just told them all that if they didn't vote for him, that they ain't really black. All right? Which kind of sounds racist to people like me and you. But it's not racist if you understand postmodernism. What he's saying is, hey, there's a black lived experience. And if you don't have that experience and it causes you to end up voting conservative, then you're not authentically black. So to us, it kind of sounds really hyper offensive. 92% of black Christians voted for Biden in 2020. Maybe they're just doing it for power. No, they're not. No, they're not. Why is that? Because that's how postmodernism works. You see? Postmodernism, there has to be a revolution to tear down structures. Remember, everything is structures. To tear down structures of power and oppression from majority cultures. So it's impossible for black Christians to be doing something for power because they're the minority. They are the powerless. That's how the Marxist version of this works. It's not OG Marxism. It's this new applied postmodernism, you may want to call it, all right, in the words of like James Lindsay. It's applied postmodernism with an activist bent towards revolution. All right, let's move on. Statistically, she would have to recognize actually blacks vote for the left more than the Christians vote for the right, but she doesn't. Why do we vote for things like abortion? We think we're doing good. Why? Because we've been brainwashed by the social groups that used a language that taught us our knowledge. That's all postmodernism. And now we go, those are babies in the womb. We're making too big of a deal out of it. She's pro-abortion. This author here is pro-abortion. She has told activists they need to stand up and fight against the overturning of Roe. You need to get out there and fight against all these theocrats, she called them on Twitter. Go fight against all these theocrats. They're trying in the name of religion to take away your God-given freedom. That's what she believes. Well, why are we against abortion? Because we think it's good, but all that is authoritarian power. Let's continue reading. What evangelicals did have was whiteness. And whiteness eventually gave them power, social and political. When I say whiteness, I know that evangelicals are not only white people, they also encompass many ethnic and racial groups. But evangelicals embrace racism because it reinforces a theological imperative buried in a practice of missionary endeavors. It is easy to consider other races and ethnic groups to be less than if they are either non-Christian or don't practice Christianity according to Eurocentric cultural norms. Do you hear this? If they don't consider our ethnic and cultural norms, well, we're better than them. Why? Because we have whiteness. It makes us think that our ideas are really, really good. okay? Like not killing children in the womb. We think those ideas are really good, but all that is a product of our whiteness from our Eurocentric background. That's what she's saying. It meant receiving the white version of Christ. Do you hear me? I'm saying this because people sometimes think I'm exaggerating. Let's read the OG material. This is the original material. This is what she says. This is crazy. This is what she means. It meant receiving the white version of Christ. Once saved, many new evangelicals of color tacitly accept cultural whiteness in order to be accepted by evangelicals. That's Vodi Bakum. In their worldview, that's Vodi Bakum, the great black Protestant preacher and theologian. Vodi Bakum has now gone, oh, that version of Christianity sounds good to me. I'm buying into that. That means that Vodi Bakum has bought into whiteness. He is no longer authentically black. He's not living the lived experience of an authentic black person. He now has embraced whiteness, you see, and it has changed. So now he's moved social groups, if you will. All right, let's keep going on. This cultural whiteness also lends itself to white American political concerns. So now let's go back to the Twitter beef. You are going to see how postmodernism is coming in to the mainstreaming of the church. Phil Vischer is one of the dudes behind VeggieTales. People still think, well, no, he's pretty neutral because he's open a lot. They still think this. They don't understand how much postmodernism has come into this thing. So William Wolfe is trying to say this. Yes, there is such a thing as Christian nationalism. Yes, there can be an element of that is dangerous, but there is no such thing as white Christian nationalism. Phil Vischer, as you're going to see, is going to say, this is where you're wrong. There is such a thing as white Christian nationalism because there is such a thing as white Christianity. There is black Christianity. There is Latina Christianity. Basically, there's all these different versions of Christianity that have come to us from the social group that we are a part of. That is how we have learned that view of reality, that view of truth. And he's saying, William Wolfe, the only reason that you don't think there's such thing as white Christian nationalism is because you don't believe there's such thing as white Christianity. In other words, you call it Christianity, but that's just because you've made the white version the normative version. And now you are in a place where you're saying, our version of this is better than your version. This is what we're talking about. So anytime you're going to have a disagreement, as we're going to see in the thread, these guys can't agree on anything because they're totally shooting past each other because this is a different view of reality. You can't have an argument about what the Bible is. What are you going to say? No, that's not a good hermeneutic. This is what the Bible means in the context. Well, that's what you think because the social group you are a part of has brought you to that knowledge. That's where your knowledge came from, is from the social group. So this is going to lead us to a radical relativism in the church. Anytime we want to have a disagreement about context and the hermeneutic and what we think that they are saying and good theology and tradition, all of that is going to be brought down to, well, yeah, but that's your white version, or that's your black version, or that's your Latina version. How are we going to have a church actually unified in the truth? What this leads us to is saying there really is no way to come to the truth. It's all going to be based on your perspective from the social group you're a part of. Keep that in mind because that's going to be very difficult for the church, and this can infect the way that you view the Bible. It is not good. We're going to go back and we're going to read it. Keep that in mind. All right. So let's start from the very beginning of it. I won't start with Here's a periodic reminder that white Christian nationalism is not a real thing. It doesn't exist in America. It poses no threat to democracy. Fearmongers who have built a cottage industry peddling fake studies, social science, and history on this are mostly liars. Christian nationalism is a real thing worth having a serious conversation about. You already said that, so let's move on. In other words, here's a discourse hack to know who to take seriously on here and who is pushing propaganda. Do they use the phrase, quote, white Christian nationalism in a serious way? If so, they are not serious or trustworthy. They are charlatans and parlatans. All right, so now we go back. Phil Vischer says, serious question. When Lauren Boebert says the church should be directing the government, how do you think she would feel if the black church or the Latino church was directing the U.S. government towards the priorities of the black or Latino communities? Now, for one thing, I already know I don't care what Lauren Boebert has to say. So in other words, we can take that on its own as a thing. I don't know what that's getting at. What Phil is getting at is trying to say this, hey, which version of Christianity are you even talking about? There's a white Christianity. There's the black Christianity. There's a Latino Christianity. Now, part of what Phil is saying is actually true, which is that, yeah, it does seem like white Christians seem to have an idea of how we are to live out the faith according to politics, according to voting, that is different maybe than black Christians. That part is true. So, but what he's saying is, well, yeah, but they only want a white version of Christianity. So that's what he's getting at here. So there's a part of that might be slightly true. So let's see what he has to say. William Wolfe says, I don't think any church should be directing the government. Phil Vischer says, well, I agree, but that wasn't the question. If Boebert believes the church should direct the government, and we can assume she doesn't mean the historically black denominations that support Democrat candidates 90% of the time, does that qualify as white Christian nationalism? Now notice, nobody ever says we should beware of black Christian nationalism, right? Nobody says that. But we do have black people on the left who claim to be Christian, like Stacey Abrams, who used the Bible to, Stacey Abrams said, I used to be pro-life, but my faith in God made me pro-choice. Well, all right, are you being a black Christian nationalist? Like, what does this actually mean? What are we talking about this? All right, so this is where all this stuff is coming from. Joel Berry comes in, he says, maybe we should stop thinking in terms of race when it comes to churches and instead divide them into biblical churches, whether they're black or white. Let's just do biblical churches and churches corrupted by hustlers, comment in pro-choice politics, black and white. That's what he's saying. There are plenty of black churches on Boebert's side. They just aren't the stereotypical black church. So this is also part of what they're saying. They're saying there's actually a lot of black people and some black churches that actually kind of do tend to be center right. Do they count? Do they not count? Where are we drawing the line? That's what he's saying, okay? Phil Vischer says, what percentage of black Protestants voted for Trump? Let me put it another way. Is Boebert pro-Trump or pro-Biden? Do black Protestants overwhelmingly support Trump? Therefore, would Boebert be in favor of the black Protestant church directing the government? Joel Berry responds, here's the thing. An idea of philosophy theology isn't, quote, white just because it's supported by a majority of white people and it's not black. So here's what he's getting at. Can we just have good theology? Can we just say, hey, we should take the Bible as it stands and use whatever? And so, in other words, Joel Berry is saying something that I agree with, but that's old school. That's when we used to believe there was a thing called absolute truth that we could get to the bottom of. Yes, Jesus Christ rose from the dead. I understand we may disagree about doctrine. We may interpret certain scriptures, but there are things that are absolutely right that we have to believe. And we can come to the truth of what that text actually means. He's playing in the old school realm. And what he's saying is I don't want to call that white or black. I just want to call that good theology. I want to call that orthodox. Well, too bad. That ain't the 2020s. So Joel Berry continues, you really poison the discourse by racially labeling something based on the skin color of the majority of adherents. It's insulting to black people to call theology white. And I sincerely hope the majority of black churches who have been corrupted by bad theology and politics will see the light. And I would hope the same for any white church facing that kind of corruption. I think black Christians should be insulted by your insinuation that Democrat pro-choice politics is an integral part of their skin color. Then Phil Vischer replies, I'm hoping you didn't mean to say the majority of black churches have been, quote, corrupted by bad theology. I'm hoping. Joel Berry responds, statistically, the majority of black evangelicals are pro-choice. In my opinion, if you're pro-choice, your entire theology and worldview is corrupt to the core. But besides that, why is it so egregious to think it's possible that the black church, after decades of segregation, redlining, and corruption by cynical inner-city political machines, would find themselves cut off from a theologically and intellectually sound theology? I'm not saying it's their fault, but you've got to get past this bias that you have, that someone being oppressed or marginalized automatically makes them more noble, godly, or correct. Did you hear that? That is a banging tweet, in my opinion, in a good way. Let's read it again. He says, you've got to get past this bias that you have, Phil Vischer, that someone being oppressed or marginalized automatically makes them more noble, godly, or correct. I think that is a banging tweet. I think it's a banging one. All right, let's see what Phil Vischer has to say. He says, wow, that's a stunning statement. Would you like to back it up with data? Joel Berry responds. He says, all I have is the Pew Research data, which shows the majority of black evangelicals being pro-choice, over twice the rate of white evangelicals. I'm sure one could find more like this if they dug around. We have to guard against, let's see, I don't want to read this part because it takes too long to explain, but he's basically saying we have to guard against this idea that because people are oppressed and marginalized, it means they're actually better than us. And that is within this postmodern worldview. I've already explained it. You have to fight for marginalized voices so that we can get a brand new perspective, because they have an access to a truth that we don't have, because we don't have their lived experience. Their lived experience as a person under oppression. That's what he's trying to get at, okay? And blah, blah, blah. He says we have to guard against this view of Black Americans that acts as if they have some special secret knowledge by virtue of them being marginalized and oppressed. They aren't the Na'vi, and we don't live on Pandora. They are human beings, sinful like all of us. Phil Vischer responds, whether you want abortion illegal in most cases or legal in most cases is your sole determinant of theological bankruptcy? What about attitudes toward the poor or immigrants, Christology? Anything else matter? All right. So this is when William Wolfe comes in, and I think he responds to that and says, abortion matters way, way, way more than anything else. I got to say this or else I'm going to be hacked. I'm not positive that William Wolfe was responding directly to what Phil Vischer said. Phil Vischer is saying, are you telling me abortion's the most important thing more than like Christology and immigrants and this and this? William Wolfe says abortion matters way, way, way more than anything else. I think what he's trying to say is, well, yeah, abortion has to matter a lot more than what you're talking about the poor. So I got to say this, I'm just going to be a hack. I don't like the way William Wolfe phrases this, because it could be taken to say that standing up for abortion matters more literally than anything else. And I do not think that that is accurate. And I will tell you, not because I'm soft on abortion. I think you know better than that. I'm not, and believe me. All right. I want it to end now. All right. But we do have to be fair about this. I would not say that that's more important than Christology. All right. The study of Christ, what his mission was, who he was, his death, his resurrection. I would not say that it's more important than grace. All right. I mean, that's our entire salvation is based on grace by faith alone. All right. By faith alone, not by works, We are saved by grace. And that is really important. When I say it's more important than the doctrine of like the sacrificial atonement, that Jesus died on a cross and that my sins and your sins were actually put on him. He took the wrath of God for our sins. That is really important. So my guess is that Wolfe wasn't actually reading that literally and reading all the things. My guess, and again, this is really hard to tell on Twitter exactly who's replying to exactly what tweet, but my guess is that what he was picking up on was that what you hear on the Christian left all the time is, all right, all you conservatives, you're freaking out about abortion, but it's not like that's more important than like poverty. That's not more important than immigration. We conservatives say, yes, it is. It absolutely is. The genocide of the unborn, 1 million deaths a year, that is very different than a quality of life issue. You see, you can't compare these things. And we know that because we have Old Testament law. So we can go to the Old Testament law and we can look at the severity of the crimes and the way that God views murder as opposed to other quality of life issues. So we do have that. My guess is that Wolfe wasn't being literal in reading that tweet. But I do want to be fair because I don't want to be a hack. I would say this: grace through faith alone is a more important issue, all right? The sacrificial atonement of Christ, that's a more important issue. We can't start getting to a place where we say, hey, standing up for abortion is more important than grace or something like that. We cannot do that, because at that point, it's just becoming more of what I would call pharisaical. And now all of a sudden you're saying, in other words, you don't even have to be a Christian. You can just be against abortion and say that that's more important than the sacrificial atonement of Christ. I doubt that's what Wolfe is saying, but it could be taken like that. So I just want to be fair. Okay, now let's keep going. Phil Vischer said to William Wolfe, this is how Phil Vischer replies. No one said that before about 1985. So now Phil Vischer's position is the same as what we are hearing sort of with Anthony Butler, which is saying, all this stuff about abortion, you guys, that wasn't even a thing that Christians used to believe. All that is was for political power. And these white, racist evangelicals that wanted to keep power, they made up a new thing and said abortion, life starts at conception, and that has to be a thing. And not even the SBC did it. So, I mean, that just started for a thing for power. So you're not on the side of history is what he's saying. I don't have time to go into history to find out if the church supported the genocide and murder of children in the womb. I don't even have time to jump into that. But I will have to say this. As far as the SBC goes, who cares what the SBC says? Hello, I said it. There's some awesome people in the SBC. They just happen to not be in leadership. Hello. The SBC is getting the people they think are in the middle that are really just lefties. Some of them are commies. J.D. Greer, who was the president of the SBC just, 2 years ago, famously is the one that said, we got to whisper about what God whispers about, and we got to shout about what God shouts about. In the Bible, God whispers about sexual immorality, but he shouts about materialism. Okay, commie.
Think about what you think about.
Huh? I wonder if God was whispering when he destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. Was God whispering when he talks about Jezebel, that wicked woman of Jezebel? In Revelation, he says, you know what, church? Because you have accepted that wicked woman Jezebel, I'm going to take away your lampstand. Shh, God's whispering it. I'm going to destroy you. Get ready to get destroyed. Here comes the whispering. Calming.
That's not right.
I don't care what the SBC said. Is it true? I don't know. I didn't even look it up. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But the SBC was dangerously close to falling into the heresy of radical Christian liberalism in the 1970s. They got saved from that, okay? Anyway, let's move on. Phil Vischer saying the same thing that this book is saying. Oh, yeah. You think it's really important. Didn't used to be until people started using it for political power. Do you see how postmodernism is always negative? It is skeptical. It's cynical. If you say something, they say, why are you saying that? Who are you trying to dominate? Why are you saying that position that you think that life starts at conception and you really, really, really care about the babies? Why are you saying that? Why are you trying to dominate people? I wonder what could it be? William Wolfe responds to Phil Vischer. Phil, do you think abortion ends a life or not? This is what he said. And then Phil Vischer comes back. Yes. By the way, kind of happy to hear him say yes. Let's see what else he has to say. He says yes, as does capital punishment and certain medical decisions and most military action. What? The question is under what circumstances ending a life permissible? And Christians disagree about that on all the issues I've raised above. So now is when you have the liberal Christian perspective on this whole issue of life. This is what they'll say. All you Christians, you're all pro-life, yet some of you support the death penalty. How could that possibly be? You say you're pro-life, but you're not, you're not against war. You also, you all think that Bonhoeffer was really good when he was trying to kill Hitler. You're against the Nazis. So you're not really pro-life. That's what they're getting at. And it takes about 3 minutes to dismantle this from the Bible. Except I would be using good theology, which is code for racist theology, to do so. All right? But if anybody looks at war in the same way as you do killing the innocent, like someone who's literally never sinned, never had the chance to sin on earth, just babies, children in the womb, it's remarkable to me how you can compare these things. Wanting to kill Hitler, who literally wants to kill everybody on the earth that's not blonde hair and blue eyes, to this, it's remarkable. So I can appreciate that Phil Vischer is saying, well, yeah, I do believe that, but there's all these other concerns of equal importance. He's giving it away there. This takes about 3 minutes to dismantle, yet he doesn't believe that you're allowed to say, well, that's good theology, that's good hermeneutic, that's tradition. All those things are bad. William Wolfe responds to him, are you seriously comparing military service to the elective murder of millions of unborn children? And then Phil Vischer says this, are you not aware that Christians have held different positions on all these questions through the years, that the SBC was officially pro-choice into the 1980s, that multiple Christian traditions refused military service because of their biblical convictions? Joel Berry comes in, and Joel Berry says, Phil, the Bible doesn't say you shall know them by their orthodox statement of faith. It says you shall know them by their fruits. If your church is pro-choice, the fruit is rotten. So we're seeing a little interplay. We're not sure which tweet he's responding to. Joel Berry says plenty of trans-affirming white churches have very orthodox statements of faith too. Something has gone very wrong with these churches. So what Joel is saying is this isn't a black and a white thing. We're talking about good theology and bad theology. And plenty of white churches are doing it too. And plenty of white churches are giving up on biblical, traditional ideas about sex and gender. And they're really bad too, is what he's saying. And then Phil Vischer responds, and if your church is anti-refugee or supports lying and cheating in leadership, also rotten? And can you tell me exactly what the biblical position is on the permissibility of abortion? When is it allowable according to Scripture? William Wolfe responds to him and he says, never. It's easy. What's your answer? Phil Vischer responds, and what Scripture leads you to that conclusion? Boom. Now we're at the end of what I'm going to read. Phil Vischer gives away the bag. What Scripture do you have on that? So Phil Vischer can say, yes, I think abortion is absolutely ending a life. Sure, I can say that. What Scripture do you have to say that it's always wrong? Do you see the games that these people are playing? Why? Because they what they want to do is create a, quote, unity in the church where nobody judges anyone else's position. That's it. And then they say, you're the one being political because you believe that someone is ending a life. They're not being political at all. In fact, they're being more pro-life because they're saying, well, yeah, sure, I think that's ending a life. I also think that you should be pro-refugee. And I think that that's exactly the same. I think you should be against capital punishment. That's exactly the same as killing an unborn innocent child. All this is coming down to postmodernism, in my opinion, and how it has infected the church. This is what's going on. This is what's going on. There is an abyss between the way that white evangelicals vote and black evangelicals vote. And there is a push now to say, you know why? You know why there's an abyss between these people? Because, quote, white evangelicals are bad. They are oppressive. They do not have any other positions. They call their positions right and good. And then we don't argue about these positions from the Bible. Have you noticed? We don't argue about them from the Bible. We argue about them from social science. We argue about them from, well, what other positions have you listened to? Or what other social? Maybe you don't understand that because you haven't understood the perspective of the, quote, the other. Maybe that's what it is. We don't actually argue about the Bible. And then if you start to argue about the Bible, it can't go anywhere because you can't agree on any particular categories, especially if they're rooted in tradition, because tradition is looked at as bad. Why is tradition bad? Tradition is bad because guess who leaves tradition? The people in power. And we have to revolt against anyone in power. This is postmodern Christianity. And I'm just telling you the truth. That leads to chaos. But I've got good news for you. You can't know God perfectly and inexhaustibly because you are finite, but there is a lot that you can build your life upon, the truth of the Word of God that never changes because He never changes yesterday, today, and forever. He is the same. You can build your life upon these principles and know that you are walking in the truth. Have a great week.
Read the Bible. You need to get back to teaching them how to read instead of teaching them how to go to hell.